This week on Act Out, we head down to the bayous of Louisiana to get the latest on the fight against the Bayou Bridge Pipeline. Speaking to organizers and residents on the front lines, we'll dive into updates and news, the rich and diverse history of those fighting, and how in the present they're coming together not just to fight, but to build a future together. Outside of the toxic industries that have come to define Louisiana. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. We have a special episode for you this week featuring voices from the front lines of the Bayou Bridge Pipeline resistance in southern Louisiana. But before we dive in, some updates on this issue. Last week, a coalition of groups opposed to the Bayou Bridge Pipeline held a press conference at Governor John Bel Edwards' office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Affected community members from all along the pipeline route shared their stories and their resolve. Documents were presented to the press that outlined clear ties between the Louisiana government and Energy Transfer Partners, the same company, by the way, behind both the Bayou Bridge Pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline, made infamous by the camps at Standing Rock last year. And since Standing Rock, across 30 states, 56 bills have been introduced that aim to crack down on protest and dissent, particularly with regards to oil and gas projects and racial justice work, which this project is a combination of both. And Bayou Bridge is no different, of course. Organizers and allies have been surveilled by multiple government agencies as well as the pipeline's private security. Water protectors are considered dangerous enough to warrant helicopter flyovers, but the workers ripping up the irreplaceable bayous are just kind of doing their job, right? Indeed, last week, ETP was doing a job in a place that they were court-ordered to stay out of. An injunction halting work in the Atchafalaya Basin was ordered on February 23rd, and less than a week later, I saw this. The Army Corps of Engineers' response? Don't worry about it. No big deal. Have a great day. But having seen the destruction in the bayous myself, hundreds of year-old trees now floating chips and logs and rising waters, this is a very big deal. And as the injunction remains in place for the Atchafalaya Basin for the time being, the rest of the pipeline route is open for business. As Cherie Foytlin, an indigenous leader of the resistance camp Loa La Vie, wrote in a recent post, "I'm glad it stopped in the basin, no doubt, and I'm sure the mostly Cajun crawfishers are too. But what about indigenous communities along Bayou Lafourche, who would like clean drinking water? What about the environmental justice community in cancer-ridden Freetown, in St. James Parish? Why doesn't their, quote, permanent harm matter?" Indeed, as Cherie pointed out to me while monitoring work around a woman's farm, she's not allowed to say no. People aren't allowed to protect their water, their land, their air, and their livelihoods in the face of gross corporate malfeasance for profit. Indeed, they don't even get a slice of that profit pie. Despite claims that the Bayou Bridge would bring in jobs and boost local economies, by ETP's own admission, the pipeline would only create 12 permanent jobs. 12. Not to mention that even now, during the non-permanent construction period, residents and organizers have documented more out-of-state license plates than local Louisiana ones. So this pipeline, just like Dakota Access, just like Manor East 2, which we've covered on the show as well, has fuck all to do with the well-being of people or planet, and everything to do with corporate profit. Still, despite the considerable corruption, collusion, and rabid capitalism, the resistance not only continues, it is making some headway. I already mentioned the injunction passed in late February, and also last week, during a week of solidarity actions, Citizens Bank pulled their financing of Energy Transfer Partners. Furthermore, the delays prompted by continuous and diverse resistance tactics will cost ETP an estimated $750 million this year. Already these small wins show what organized and engaged people can do, even in a place as steeped in the oil and gas industry as Louisiana. And in today's episode, you'll get to hear from some of these people, the backstory of this project, the rich and diverse history of those fighting, and how in the present, they are coming together not just to fight, but to build a future together. Take a look.
Right now, we need to do everything that we can and use the tools that our movement has at its disposal to stop this pipeline and other dangerous projects that threaten water and land and the way of life for many different communities. I think it is really powerful what folks are doing along the route, the direct action that's happening, the lawsuits that are happening. I think at this stage, especially with the Trump administration in office, we need to be doing everything that we can to hold the line.
I started getting involved in the No Bayou Bridge Pipeline movement pretty much since its inception. Whenever I was leaving Standing Rock, I was hearing about the proposal to build the tail end of the Dakota Access Pipeline down here. So when I got here, I immediately started working towards voicing my opposition to it. So the vision for this camp is to create an eco-village as well as a hub center for people who want to come learn more sustainable practices. So it's almost like a rehabilitation center for people who are wanting to get away from the oil dependency lifestyle and want to live more in harmony with the earth. And this is also a space of sanctuary for water protectors who want to come and stay and be of service to the water and the lands here, and who want to connect with other water protectors and be a part of the day-to-day activities that are involved in this fight. So this pipeline is going to intercept 700 different bodies of water, and one of those waterways is Bayou Lafourche, which happens to be the drinking water of 300,000 people who live in southern Louisiana, and a portion of those people are the United Homination tribe, which is my tribe. And so us, the Planishton Indians, the atakapa-ishak tribe, a little bit of the Tunica-Biloxi tribe, we've been banding together to just basically like put our heads together to figure out like what it is that we can do. Also, the person who owns this land here for the camp, she comes from indigenous background as well. So she is acting as a leader in this role here to enforce indigenous policies and indigenous social norms here, you know, to treat everybody and everything as though we're all relatives, we're all part of the same life force, basically.
Hamadakuyapi, chante washte nape chuzapi, ohitikawi mie. My name is Ann Whitehat. I'm from Rosebud, South Dakota. I'm Sichangwi Lakota. And I'm here down in South Louisiana at the Louis Levy camp, working with folks from Louisiana Rise and the Coalition and tons of volunteers down here and water protectors to stop the Bayou Bridge Pipeline. Where I come from, you know, we have this ceremony every year with our Sundance, and we go without water for 4 days. So we know what it's like to not have that, to have to sacrifice for that prayer for the water and for life, for our way of life, you know. And I want to make sure that my kids, my children, my grandchildren are able to continue to this way of life too, and it's integral that we have water to live, you know. That's the bottom line. This is like our first and foremost thing, right, that we need to do is stop this Bayou Bridge Pipeline, and then we want to build this sustainable community out here. We've got like 11 acres, and we want to build the dream, okay? The dream is to build a sustainable community that's modeled and based on our indigenous philosophy and our values, right? And that we can model what the just transition is. Like we can model that, okay? That's the idea. And to be able to have a space for some social justice work in the communities around here, and to be able to teach our kids about permaculture and renewable resources and energy and training, you know, really doing some hands-on training work. So this is the dream out here for the land. So that's the goal. Those are the goals. Okay, we've got 2 goals.
And what would you like, what are your, how are you going about fighting the pipeline? I understand that there's an injunction now. What are you working on as of right now with the pipeline construction?
Right, well, you know, we have several strategies. With the injunction, the recent injunction, we're working to really step up our monitoring efforts right now. You know, I think that's one of the biggest strategies that we can do on the ground right now, and we're really looking for folks to get this water protector training, and to be out on the line. You know, we got 168 miles to cover. You know, and we know that this company doesn't give a you know, they don't care. They don't care if the court tells them to stop. they're going to keep on going. We've seen their track record is up in North Dakota and Standing Rock at Atakapa-ishak. So we know how they are. Okay, we know how they act, and so we need to act accordingly. We need to be prepared. And one of the strategies that we have is this water protector training, which is basically and very essentially just training people to look for violations.
You were telling me about over dinner, you were talking about CF, and that's a local industry. Tell me about what you were saying about that impact on the community.
Well, first, CF is an ammonia producing plant, and right now it's the largest ammonia producing plant in the United States. And also the people that stays around the CF industries, that's a part of the ABIN community. And the ladies that stay in the ABIN community, they have miscarriages. And the kids that stays in that area also have like low cognitive skills and stuff like that because of the benzene concentration that's in the water and the ammonia that's produced in the air.
And so talk about how you got started in this work and what you're doing now with the Bayou Bridge Pipeline.
Well, actually, I had got started in environmental. I was actually a librarian assistant, and I seen an elderly lady was printing out a lot of paperwork, and it was environmental stuff. And I was on my lunch break, and I said, lady, I can help you out with your work. And I had wanted to go there and print out, help her print out her stuff. So I took my whole lunch break to help her print out her stuff, which my boss was like, why? But I was interested in some of the stuff that she was doing. So I did that, and she was like, well, you want to be a part of my organization? And I was like, of course. She's a part of the LEAN organization, and she the founder of Louisiana Environmental Justice Community Organization Coalition. She no longer living right now because she's been going through a lot of respiratory problems and stuff like that, because she stays right next to a sugarcane producing plant right there in White Castle, Louisiana. But I found out like the last year of her life that me and her were kin. And I was like, that's why we worked good together. But she was an activist for 35 years. So it's in the blood that, we like to help our community out and stuff like that. Now for the Bayou Bridge Pipeline, I'm like the researcher. They tell me about an organization that they want research on, I'll go research it. Also too, I had to look at stock and stuff like that with energy transfer partners. I let people know about the stock trends, who funding, energy transfer partners, all the different banks, so they could go there and try to make sure that these banks don't fund energy transfer no more. It's a lot of stuff need to be, you got to get research. I mean, even with tiger swine that was also in North Dakota that were protecting the pipelines with the pretend people that funded the Bayou Bridge Pipeline. Tiger swine can't operate in Louisiana because they found out that they had a lot on their application. So they don't operate legally in Louisiana, but they do have ties to certain police departments in St. Charles Parish and also in New Orleans Parish. They also have like tiger swine people that actually working in tiger swine, working in Louisiana, but they're working with other organizations in Leesville and Shreveport and some other places. They just scatter around, but they still doing operational stuff with tiger swine. But they're disguising themselves. Right. They're still doing surveillance. They're still reporting a lot of work to people. They try to harass Miss Sherry. They're over this pipeline protest stuff, and they're harassing a lot of other people.
We are a tribe that has lived here in Louisiana, and I guess what people currently call Louisiana and Texas, probably for about 4,500 years. We live in bayous and prairies, coastlands. We've hunted and fished and made our lives out of the land out there. That's from about the Atchafalaya Basin over to about Galveston Bay in Texas. One of the first tribes that Spanish explorers encountered. Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca was shipwrecked with us on an island in Galveston Bay for a while. And he noticed some things about us. One, it was the first European person to record same-sex marriage among native tribes, something which many of our tribal nations have done. Eventually the world will catch up with us. We always seem to be just a little bit ahead of everyone else. He also noted that, like some members of our nation found another group of shipwrecked white dudes, and they had started eating each other, and we kind of brought him over there because we're like, well, you're our white dude. We don't know who these other white dudes are. And he noticed that our tribe wouldn't pick them up because they had eaten one another. I think we had distaste for cannibalism. In spite of that, the name by which people usually know our nation is atakapa, and that is a word in like Choctaw for cannibal. That's because when the French asked some Choctaw people who lives west of you, they said, oh, it's just a bunch of cannibals, atakapa. So that might have just been a slur. The Choctaw were a very stratified civilization, and we have always been kind of believers in decentralized governance. And I know cool anarchist kids in my neighborhood, just like with same-sex marriage, they will eventually catch up with us because we slightly more practice with that than they do. But the real name for ourselves is Ishak, and Ishak means the human beings, and many tribal names mean that.
So talk about the specific history of oil and gas in this region and how that's impacted your community and onto the current project of the Bayou Bridge.
Like a lot of things within our current economic system, which I won't say is advanced, I think a lot of times there's a notion in the United States that having technological objects makes a civilization advanced rather than having certain structures where you, say, take care of your old people or care for your children or make sure everyone has enough. But under our sort of degenerate economic system, you kind of get involved with things where it's kind of always a lesser of evils, and there's the benefits, and then there's like a lot of cost to that. Many people in our tribe have worked in the oil industry. My father was a retired oil worker, worked at the world's largest oil refinery in Baton Rouge, Exxon. Chief of our tribe, Edward Crashan, is a retired oil worker. Many other people in our tribe work in the oil industry. Whenever I speak for the tribe, I have to say that, as a tribe in general, we are not specifically opposed to oil and gas, and we know a lot of our tribal members are dependent on that for their livelihood. So there's that part. The other part is that there is no way to divorce Native culture from our relationship to our environment. It's not the notion that you have like in Genesis where you subdue the earth, or a notion where, like we have currently in capitalism, like everything is reduced to consumption. It has no other value. There's a notion with Native people, regardless of nation, that I find, is that we are just caretakers for these environments. We're just passing through. We're part of it. We live with it, and we care for it for a bit, and we have relationships with certain animals, relationships with certain plants. They predate us here. They've lived, say, in the Atchafalaya Basin long before we have. And you use them for a time, you care for them for a time, and then you pass them on. You pass them on to your children and to their children. And whenever you make a decision, it should be a good decision for children several generations down. Well, the decision to bulldoze through the Atchafalaya Basin and potentially pollute it by a group of people who don't really care very much about whether they polluted something. Those are decisions that can have really long-ranging consequences. The risk is a risk that will be passed down to several generations. And once it is gone, it will never quite be what it was before. I think creation myths, even if we don't take them literally, say a lot about what people think about themselves. And in the Ishak creation myth, we walked out of the Gulf of Mexico. that speaks a lot to our relationship with the water and how much we understand that that is such an essential part of life. We don't really think about where we get our water from now. We turn on a tap and a company has supplied us with it. But I think cultures that are a little bit more closely tied or have cultural memory of gathering their own water, of seeking water, have a different relationship with it and understand how sacred water is and how much it really is life. When we say, a lot of people from Standing Rock are familiar with ni wichoni, like the Lakota phrase, which if you translate into ishak is ak piskax. That phrase of water is life is something many native tribes have that phrase somewhere in their ceremonies. And it's a recognition that the resources that we use and care for, they will sustain us. And that you need constant reminders that that sustains you. That's something that in our culture often people forget. People forget where their food comes from, where their water comes from, where their medicine comes from, where all the things they make come from. They maybe don't spend that much time in nature or aren't around people that fabricate things and build things and repair things. You know, in French, which all four of my grandparents spoke like us growing up, there's that term sauvage that they use for Indians. But sauvage kind of means savage in English, but not quite. It's from this Latin root that actually more translates not as uncivilized, but as a nature person. I like that. I like the word nature person because it indicates that whatever we are as native people is intimately tied to nature. Mm. So I may not be a savage, but I'm definitely a proud sauvage because I think that term really applies very well to a native view of life.
I grew up on the south coast of the Gulf Coast of Louisiana in New Iberia. I spent a lot of my childhood right on the coast. At my dad's family is from Avery Island. My mother's family is from Abbeville. I spent a lot of time at Seminole Point growing up, so I've spent my entire life on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana. Throughout my entire life, I've seen the coast start to shrink. I've seen land loss, places where it used to be solid ground when I was a child are no longer there, or their water. I've watched hurricanes completely devastate the coastline as well. I've seen the majority of my family lose their homes multiple times. I've seen oil spills that have contaminated the Gulf that a lot of my family uses to get their food sources from, or that they use to make a living by shrimping, crawfishing, and other fishing sorts of things. So I've just kind of seen this damage that has come from oil companies through coastal erosion and through oil spills my entire life. And this is just another example of the oil industry kind of encroaching in potentially damaging ways in my family's area. The pipeline where it's projected to go through, it goes through Vermilion Parish, which is where my mother's family's from, and St. Martinville, which is not far at all from where I grew up. When I look at specifically with my culture, with Cajun culture, I mean, the food ways are definitely threatened, like our traditional fishing ways, crawfishing, shrimping. A lot of our economies are threatened by that. Our tourism is threatened by that. Mm-hmm. Even now, Tabasco, which is made on Avery Island, they just had an article that was published that McElhinney is looking like it will have to eventually evacuate that island due to land loss. So it definitely will threaten a lot of our traditional ways, and so much of being Cajun is tied to the land. It's about being, not just like hunting or fishing for food or for economic reasons, but for also just going out and being in the environment is very important. And those are definitely things that are going to be lost or affected.
So why do you feel that, because there's a lot of these sort of dirty energy projects in Louisiana, in Cajun country, why do you think that's the case, that people have allowed or been able to be overpowered by these sort of projects in the past?
I think it really boils down to just being traditionally disenfranchised. People really, my grandparents weren't allowed to go to school past 6th grade. They weren't allowed to speak their language at school. Education was not an option for them, as it was for a lot of the other traditional groups in Louisiana, especially when they're people of color. And if you don't have an access to an education, you're just going to do what you need to do to survive. And the oil companies came in, and these are decent paying jobs that people can get to survive when there's not many other economic opportunities. And so they are going to do what they have to do to survive, even if it means that it could damage their health and their home. It sort of just turns into this really sick addiction that people have. And even today, with better access to education, I mean, Louisiana lags very far behind with that. And when if you're growing up poor, that you can get a good job right out of high school that's going to pay, you're going to do what you need to do. And it's unfortunate.
More and extended versions of these videos will be available via our social media sites, and links to those are at the end of the show and in the show descriptions. And before I left Louisiana, Cherie told me what the fight really needs right now is capacity. So if you're watching this and want to help, really help out on the ground and have the ability to do so, visit nobbp.org and apply to go to camp. If you can't help out in person, you can always find ways to help out from afar via that same site. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Heads up for those of you in Austin, Texas, I will be performing at Monkey Wrench Books on March 15th, Thursday. It's a free event. No South by Southwest bullshit necessary. For more info on that, visit artkillingapathy.com. As always, check out the last slide and the show description to find sites mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates as well as posted videos, images, and articles, visit us on social media. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rice to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch. We got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and set my